Welcome to our second live stream. Tonight, we are honored to have Timothy Gordon as our guest. But before we get started talking to Timothy, I just want to give props to my wife. I honestly have to say, she's the best cook in the world. She's an Italian girl, but tonight she cooked me up some Spanish steak with some Spanish beans. I normally don't like beans, but these beans were out of this world. And I said to my wife, "What is your secret? These beans are delicious." She said, "Goya. Goya beans are superior to any beans. I would not cook any meal with any other bean." So I just want to give a shout out to Goya. Go out and stock up on Goya beans. So tonight's guest is Timothy Gordon. He's the author of Catholic Republic and Rules for Retrogrades. Tonight we have him here for a different reason, though. We'll discuss these books if we get to that. But tonight the main reason I'd like to have him here is because he spoke out on Twitter defending the Catholic Church, and he was fired by a Catholic high school. To me, this is absurd, and I just wanted to get his story from him, from the man it happened to. And then we're going to ask him a few questions. I have some questions from some patrons and subscribers that had sent me emails when they knew he was coming on. But mostly, I just want to hear Timothy's take on this situation. So you can go ahead and tell us your story, Timothy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on BCC, Blue Collar Catholic. I don't even know your first name, right?
My name's Bob.
Yeah, Bob, what's up, man? Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, it's hard to know what's public record and what's not, but I'm a, 39-year-old American straight white male of Italian and Scottish descent, Roman Catholic, all the things people tend to know about me. I have a reasonably large family with 6 kids. 5 girls and a boy, and a beautiful wife that some people will remember from her Twitter days at Ask Your Husband. That's all done now. The world's changed around rapidly over the last 6 months, arguably the strangest 6 months on record. And, to say nothing of the COVID hoax, what's happened in the wake of it is that the exercises of control by the controllers stirred people up. The BLM riots, which were orchestrated race riots by Soros front groups, they landed on their mark. And that's why we're seeing lots and lots of people with stories just like mine fired from their job for calling terror. After 9/11, if one decried Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda or ISIS, now we call it, for violent acts of terror, then one, of course, did not find oneself under the knife of public scrutiny and public scorn, public opprobrium. That ain't the case anymore, right? I mean, that's 2001. Bob, you remember it. I remember it. I mean, I was in college then, and we've seen that day come and go. So now you can't even call out terror for what it is. That's precisely what I was doing in the last days of May and the earliest days of June of this year, when most people were skipping the movie and they were just turning on the Fox News every night around and gathering the family around the TV to watch the mayhem, murder, looting. Looting really sounds like we're going easy on looters. Just outright rioting and mayhem and murder and arson in the streets. I grew tired of it, like a lot of Americans, not a large enough number, but I grew tired of it. Took to Twitter, was just reporting that BLM is, in fact, as a matter of historical record, an FBI designated terrorist organization, a BIE, a Black Identity Extremist Movement, as of 2017. And lots of people have jumped on the bandwagon now. And around that time, it's like, I mean, it was an easier mark to make to characterize BLM as a terrorist organization. instead of ANIFA. I was wondering why they delayed so long in making the AG designated terror org mark for ANIFA. And so that's not the point. So I called them a terrorist organization. And on June 3rd, right before lunch, I found out a student petition, even though only a portion of the people who signed it were students. Most of them were students I never taught. Some weren't even students at my Catholic school. I teach at the one Catholic high school in Bakersfield, California. Make that taught, strike that. I taught at the single Catholic high school in Bakersfield, California. And by dinner time, they'd already canceled me. I was in the middle of an interview with Henry Davis, Black MAGA supporter. My wife walked in, I was sitting right where I am now. And she said, you're canceled or you're fired, in the words of the Don. Gave me the cut throat signal. And since then, life went into fast forward mode, and we're moving. We're all in boxes here. We're leaving California. Got to get out of town. Tons has transpired since then, but you probably know the deal from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your point about Al Qaeda. I didn't even connect that. I remember after 9/11. Can you imagine someone kneeling after 9/11 when the American flag was up? I remember the NFL. I'm from Jersey. I remember the New York Giants all running out holding American flags. Can you imagine that day after 9/11, that first football game after 9/11, if one player took a knee, that guy would have been kicked out of the NFL. Now, I did a video about a month ago, and I was wearing a I Do Not Kneel shirt. I wasn't even thinking about what t-shirt I was wearing. I was taking a walk by our lakefront, and I had an idea for a video. I came in and I just shot it raw. And I had a guy questioning my Catholicity because I was wearing such a horrible racist shirt. And I was like, what are you talking about? And we went on probably chatting, going back and forth on the comments like 10 times. And this guy thought I was a racist because I would not kneel. And I was like, what a backward world when someone who's patriotic is considered a racist. And sure, you're right. It's like the weirdest 6 months of my lifetime.
Without a doubt, man. And it's really become difficult to decipher the useful idiots, which is, morally speaking, there's less onus on their shoulders. The guy, like, I guess the one you're speaking to, and the moles who are just acting like useful idiots, like as if a human being of IQ 90 or above couldn't tell the difference between a racist and someone that's justly enraged at terror. I don't buy it. I always look. I make jokes about the average sort of dumb guy on the street that gets taken for every ride there. The average rube. America's full of them. I'm sad to say now, but I refuse to believe that these guys don't actually get it. I refuse to believe that dude that you're talking about actually thought you're a racist. You just don't like terrorist organizations. It turns out propaganda campaigns work, just like Brezhnev said, just like the Russians said coming out of the Cold War, the KGB. Brainwashing works. It doesn't work on everyone. Look at you and I and our devoted followers, but it works on over half of the people, and that's the frightening part.
Getting back to your story, from the reports I read, you got fired on the same day your daughter had brain surgery. Is that accurate?
No, that's so my daughter had brain surgery in April the 6th, and I was fired on June the 3rd. The only reason that piece of trivia, sizable piece of trivia, figured its way into the story, as it were, going forward, is because it was a Catholic school. I was the figurehead of the Catholic school, the main Catholic face of the school. You kind of either loved me or hated me. I had lots of devotees at the school, but they all knew that I was a Catholic, conservative, cultural commentator, personality, whatever. So I had my place there. It wasn't, Bakersfield is the most conservative city in California by most measures. So it's not like I was hated. I don't teach in Berkeley. This is the Great Central Valley, which has a sizable, we call it Okie West, right? Lots of Dust Bowl Okies who came out here, during the Dust Bowl. So this is not San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles. It's not Hollywood. And The point of the story is that they were all praying for my daughter every day in April. Letters home, Mr. Gordon's eldest daughter, Abigail, everyone knew her there. And it's prominent because within 2 months, I mean, she was still out there on the couch, kind of doing a slow recovery from a brain surgery after the whole school had been praying for her, and they let me go. And, as of 15 days from today, we lose our health insurance. And so, people have been very generous and have gone to timothyjgordon.com and made donations. And it's been a hell of a thing. It's been really touching. But I mean, I didn't know that on June 3rd. I knew the Lord would provide, behold the fowls of the air. How worried are they for their continued sustenance? Not much. And the Lord loves us that much more, but it's still scary and it's still crappy. It's still incredibly, undignified for the school to let you go when your daughter's still recovering from a surgery that the entire school en masse prayed for and acted as if they had genuine concern about.
Yeah, that's very sad. And I would encourage my listeners to please go to Timothy Gordon. I guess it's a Timothy Gordon GoFundMe they have set up for you.
Well, yeah. So we set up the GoFundMe. That's a little bit of a trick because, it's run by SJWs who were given a huge swaths of cash to BLM and BLM supporters. So after we had that up for about, it's still up technically, but except it's not a good organization. And they put a freeze on the cash and all that several different times.
Wow.
Before, we had to have the lawyer or my lawyer write a demand letter just to unfreeze the cash. So we set up an alternate one, crowdfunding. Also, it's called Donor Box, and you can go to timothyjgordon.com, and that's where we've gotten the bulk of the work done. So thank you, everyone out there. Everyone's been incredibly generous.
Yeah, a lot of my got a lot of positive response. I had some negative response, I'll be honest with you, but the majority of my viewers had positive responses about you, and they were worried about you, and they were really glad that you were coming on.
Thanks. What's the negative response? They like the BLM or what? What's up with that?
Honestly, the negative response is they thought you were disrespectful to Bishop Barron and Pope Francis at times. But I went through some of your stuff, and I seen how you called them out when you thought they were wrong on theological grounds, but I never seen any, as Bishop Barron would call it, calumny, I think is the word he used. I've never seen anything that I thought was out of line. I mean, I don't know if you know my story. I was an evangelical for 30 years. I came back to the Catholic Church 5 years ago. And so I don't know all the canon law. I'm not up to date like yourself, but I do know that the laity is called to hold our leaders accountable in a respectful, loving way. Right. And I even said that in a couple of my videos. I told my viewers I've watched some of his stuff and I've read some of his stuff, and I don't see anything out of line. So,
well, a lot of Catholics have adopted the Protestant characterization of Catholics, which is, as you know better than anyone, they think, evangelicals think that something like, papal primacy means papal infallibility all the time, right? And they don't understand that popes have spoken ex cathedra twice in 2,000 years. And they, I guess by dint of association with the Bishop of Rome, that the other bishops carry some sort of personal magisterium that's infallible as well. This is nonsense. So it's just low information people out there, with all, begging the pardon of whichever listeners of yours are the ones we're talking about here. It's just ignorance. We do not have the rigorous conformist, emperors not wearing any clothes sort of a magisterial hierarchy that Protestants ascribe to us, even though lots of low information Catholics assume we do. When a bishop is wrong, he's wrong. He's held to the standard of bimillennial magisterial context, and it's inarguable. So when a bishop's wrong, even the Bishop of Rome, unless he's speaking ex cathedra, we're called to call him out on it. It's not just that we have the right to do so. The canon law and the catechism says that we have the duty to do so. And these guys are wrong all the time when they're speaking off the cuff. So it's not like a strange situation, particularly in the last 100 to 200 years. These modernists are intentionally wrong a lot of times, and that's a whole different matter. But in the case of Bishop Barron, he's just he is a smart guy. He's just, I'm sorry to say, he uses tone in a really duplicitous way, and he's often deceptive. His words and his tone don't meet up.
So I have a question for you, and then if you don't mind, we'll get to some of my viewers' questions. So when the 2016 election, 81% of evangelicals voted for Trump. And I seen a couple polls about Catholics, and I seen one, it said 41%, and I seen one, it was 61%. Either one, as pro-life as the Catholic Church is, how come we're not as high as the evangelicals when we have the most pro-life president in the history of America? What would your take on that be? Not catechized correctly, or what would you say?
Sure. Catechesis is always to blame. The seamless garment heresy is to blame, where Catholics are being taught by the catechists, theology teachers, parish priests, pastors, bishops, something called the seamless garment that's reflected by USCCB teaching recently. George Soros and George Soros front groups in 2015 and 2016 made a real effort to infiltrate and to create a so-called Catholic spring, which is really based on the seamless garment. And if you don't know what that is, it's the teaching that really any social doctrine in the church is a life teaching insofar as it touches in some way on human lives. No, a life teaching, that which is inarguable, is that which bears on as an existential matter, life per se, meaning abortion, euthanasia. These are really the life issues. In 2004, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith clarified under Ratzinger that war and the imposition of the death penalty are not life issues, strictly speaking, because one can still present oneself for Holy Communion if one differs, and I guess has the favors the more permissive view of the church on war or death penalty. You don't have to be exactly in line with the Pope. It's a prudential judgment call. There's no such thing as prudence on a life issue, which is abortion and euthanasia. There is no taking of innocent human life. That's murder with abortion or euthanasia. So what the George Soros and groups like that did through PICO, People Organizing Communities or something, Cardinal Maradiaga, Pope Francis's very best friend, he helped in a series of moves, basically helped George Soros to infiltrate the American Catholicism, USCCB, really, read a very corrupt organization. And it has no magisterial value, by the way. The bishops' organizations were created at Vatican II. They really have no magisterial weight. The bishops themselves do, ironically. The whole is less than the sum of its parts.
Wow.
But so the point is, through PICO and Catholics United, groups like that, they created a Catholic spring that turned all issues. It basically, in order for a faithful believing Catholic to be allowed to vote for the #1 issue pro-abortion Democrat Party, again, because it was so clear, it is so clear, so black and white. A Catholic, you either have to not vote or vote Republican. It's that clear. The church officials can't say this because they're a 501c3, which perverts the purity of their teaching, Eunice. But the point is, if you're a Catholic and you don't want to vote for Trump on November 3rd, you just got to stand down. You're really not allowed to vote for a Democrat unless it's one of the, I don't know, like 3 Democrats on the national ticket since 1990 that are pro-life, and that's not what you have in Biden. You're not allowed to vote for a Democrat who is pro-gay marriage, all those issues. So what they did in 15 and 16 is to try to make, they know they're not going to get poverty, the environment, BLM type egalitarian measures, immigration. They know they're not going to make these weigh in the scales more heavily than abortion, but the seamless garment heresy tries to talk about them as if they're as important as abortion or euthanasia. They're not. Seamless garment has been knocked down continually by the magisterium of the church since the 60s, when it sprung its head up from hell. But nevertheless, that the truth has nothing to do with it. It's what the bishops insinuate and what the bishops all but teach is they're in league with the Democrat Party, more or less. That's the end run. And that's why most Catholics vote like idiots. More than half of Catholics vote like idiots and against their faith.
So, but what was interesting, I read a letter from the United States bishops. I think it was from last year, where they said the most important issue was abortion. And I actually used that to the gentleman who was calling me out because I don't kneel. And he used the seamless garment argument back, but I wasn't aware of that argument at the time. I was like, what the heck is he talking about? We're talking about abortion. So I guess there are some conservatives within the bishops that got that in the letter. Are you familiar with that letter I'm talking about?
Yeah, I've seen. I mean, that's the church teaching. So and I believe I know what you're talking about. But the point is, I mean, at any time that it's kind of like James Martin. Look at the entire ministry of Father James Martin. You could always say, well, the church teaches. Francis in January of this year kind of admitted. You can every once in a while get the bishops of the church to admit that one of the heresies or straight up Catholic falsehoods that they've been taking a knee to, no pun intended, is indeed a falsity or a heresy or whatever. Every once in a while, you'll get a real clear moment, like when Francis kind of he got gang pressed into saying, yeah, I can't really endorse what Martin's doing. It's directly against Catholic teaching. But he meets with them all the time. Martin is allowed to run around and to say, gay things all the time. Pardon the pun. And he's on a long leash. Meanwhile, if Cardinal Sarah says, as he did 3 years ago, hey, why doesn't everyone try at Lent taking an ad orientem posture during the consecration? The next day, the Vatican's out. So you could tell by the size of the leash on a mostly faithful prelate. If they say something faithful, they get knocked down for it. 95% of the time, the unfaithful prelates are going around saying heresy or borderline heresy or heteropraxy, and they're not getting hit for it. They only get hit when they occasionally do. So the letter you're talking about, Bob, is what I would designate. I mean, you might have your own view on it, but it's what I would designate one of those times when, kind of like when Francis in January condemned Martin, more or less, the bishops who are corrupt, who are leftist, have their arms wrenched into making them admit to the ignorant faithful what the Catholic teaching actually is. But those are the exception, not the rule.
Okay.
That's how I look at it.
Would you mind taking a few questions from my viewers?
You bet.
Okay, so a couple I remember sent me through my email. One lady said she loved when you had your long talks with Taylor Marshall. How come you went on your own?
Well, that's sort of the question. And look, I mean, what people have to understand is YouTube and doing, now I'm going to be doing classes on the internet. It's a kind of, I mean, we want this stuff to come across professionally, right? When I was with Marshall, now that I'm not with Marshall, you set the background. We're going to be making some technological improvements actually as we move to Mississippi here. But the point is, we want it to come across professionally. The goal is to reduplicate the kind of setting you would do if you went on Fox News and all that. But those people went to journalism school, right? I went to grad school and law school. And I mean, that's not nothing. I know to you know, not be pounding beers as I do this or eating Cheetos or whatever. But the point is, the standards of professionalism for YouTube are emergent. And when given the parting of ways that TNT underwent, in the midst of really being, I mean, it was a sensation. I'm not going to lie. No false humility here. It was crazy in the spring of 2019. What a sensation it was among basically all faithful any faithful Catholics you run into, you're like, oh, TNT, it's the thing right now. So the fact that it was severed so immediately in fall of 2019, when we were still growing strong, I mean, we're still growing our base on Marshall's channel. I understand that caught people off guard. So what I'm saying about these 2 points is standards of professionalism. I don't know exactly how much to say, but I wanted to keep going. I wanted to keep going with Marshall, and maybe I haven't made that clear enough because I'm not a game player. I like to tell people honestly, I just didn't want to immediately after I had a channel come out and say too much. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to keep going. Marshall did not. I never understood precisely why or why not. And just in events which have transpired mostly since Easter, people see they're even though on that show it was remarkable. Me and Taylor Marshall only met in person one time in real life.
No way.
And we really did agree. It was remarkable. I'll say this, issue by issue, we approached it from different angles, even though we're both Aristotomists. And people, for whatever reason, people liked the mashup, the chemistry or whatever. I see it. So it's not like we were approaching from vastly different angles. We're both professionally, graduate Thomists, trained in grad schools under pretty famous Thomists. So it's not like it was that big a difference, but we have very different temperaments, which people can readily see up on the screen. And it made a great combo. And so, the one major issue we disagree on is the Society of St. Pius X. And that was growing in prominence throughout the year and nearly year and a half we made videos together. But it wasn't growing to the point where I agreed that we needed to sever ties. And I'm not sure if that's why he did. He really, he plays it close to the vest. He doesn't share much information with anyone. And you'd think, hey, I was co-host of the show on his channel there, which really gave him the big bump in YouTube subscribers. So you'd think I would have inside knowledge. The truth of the matter is, people out there, I mean, this might be some big reveal on your show for you, but I don't have much more information than anybody else, right? And he plays things very close to the vest. And since then, things haven't been friendly. I've reached out a couple times, since Easter by calling, never receive a call back since Easter. So, a text back indicating I'm not going to be calling back is not the same thing as a call back. So I don't know in the man's head where the possibility of reconciliation lies or any of that. I mean, it's just our faith, and there's never any big obvious problem aside from things you saw up on the screen. There's a natural disparity of temperament, but that's what made the show great. And there's never a super obvious etiology, to use a medical term, for the break in my mind. So much so that I wanted to keep going, just simultaneous to having my own channel on the side. And he didn't want that. And since then, things have not gotten better, but kind of the other way. So I have no clue is the answer to that question. Not a ton of new info, but I'll tell you this, Bob, this is the most of a reveal I've ever done on your show here. So maybe that gives you ratings, as they'd call it on network television.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Appreciate your honesty. That's one of the things I notice about you. You're a straight shooter, and I admire that.
Don't play games. I don't play games. No, I tell as much info as I can without being professionally irresponsible. So it's at least time to say that much. I have very little clue, and yet I've called twice since Easter, and my calls, it's been made clear, will not be picked up, which is rough. It's just bad. Christian brothers that agree about so much, but as strangers, relative strangers, but it's like whatever the chemistry was, it gave us both a big bump. I mean, he's getting tweeted by Trump. I'm, working in a possibly formal capacity with the Trump campaign too. It's like, both of us have gotten great boons from our work together. It was a great time and people loved it. And, everyone kind of knows that much. So I don't know what the holdup is. I don't know what the problem is, but I'm not withholding any info on you at this point. That's really all I know. And it's a shame. It's a shame. Reconciliation is kind of the beating heart of the faith. And so it's strange when that's not ubiquitously acknowledged across Christendom.
Well, it's almost like most marriages, it's opposite temperaments attract, and that's what make you guys great. You guys had different temperaments that made you guys really good. But just like a marriage, sometimes your wife don't tell you what's bugging her, and you're trying to figure out what I do wrong, and that's what I sense here. So, so I hope you guys work it out. I'm sure there'll be a day where you guys reconcile, and that'll be a great show.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not as sure as you are, but I've been totally open to it, and I've been totally forthcoming. So, in my own defense, it's look, man, that's the heart of the faith. But I mean, I'm not trying to push back too much, but in a marriage, let's talk about matrimony for half a minute. Because my wife and I have been having these great talks. We're coming up to our 15th anniversary celebration, and we've been just having random. Yeah, there's a lot you face down together. I mean, you face brain surgery, hemispherectomy of your kid, or sudden firings, or, real physical dangers. And the day by day kind of erosion of the elements to romance that happens when these dangers arise. So there's a lot of serious, not serious danger in the sense that the sacrament isn't protected, because it is protected through supernatural graces. But in marriage, you become one flesh, and you're weathering the hardest stuff on romance. Whereas, a formal contractual relationship, when you're just, you're doing a podcast 3 times a week, it's kind of like, I'd like to think that it's not as delicate. I mean, there's no relationship as complex as a marriage. So in one sense, the analogy is fair. In another sense, it's like, it should be pretty easy to keep things together, I would say, if I could push back a bit.
Well said. Very well said. But the one thing you said that you guys really didn't see eye to eye, can you briefly explain that to my viewers? Because I think a lot of my viewers have no idea what you were talking about. The St. Pius.
Oh, yeah, it's a whole can of worms. But the Society of St. Pius X is a breakaway group after Vatican II. I'm really deeply sympathetic to, basically, why do we have a new mass instead of the Tridentine Latin Mass, and then some other side issues. But the most symbolically relevant issue is the Mass, and then some of the other documents like Dignitatis Humanae from the Council. Archbishop Lefebvre is the leader of the society. It was completely licit until 1988, from like 1970 to 1988. In 1988, he made a unilateral, meaning without the consent of Rome, consecration of 4 bishops. And that's disobedience, right? And as much as I'm sympathetic to Lefebvre himself and the SSPX, because they're anything but your doctrinal liberals. They're the doctrinal conservatives. You like that? It's inarguable that this happened in 1988. He got excommunicated. Benedict XVI, whatever it was, 20 years later, removes the excommunication, and yet the status of Society of St. Pius X is still canonically irregular, meaning they're not in full communion with Rome. There's lots of, to be fair, I'm trying to be fair here. There's lots of weaponized ambiguity that Rome has used. I think, leftist Rome, to try to do precisely what it was doing around Easter, to make right-wingers in the church argue with one another over the status of SSPX. And Rome is masterful at using weaponized ambiguity. Some dimensions of this whole configuration of facts and interpretations are more arguable, some are less arguable. So there, I don't want to wade into what's arguable and what wasn't, but what's not arguable is Marshall was even more sympathetic to them than I am. There are people on the Catholic right that are far less sympathetic to them than I am. I'm kind of right in the middle. My brother, who I do the podcast with on Rules for Retrogrades, is less sympathetic than me. I'm kind of maybe, I don't know exactly if it's a midpoint between he and Marshall, but there are some clear do's and don'ts, right? And so we started debating, in a way that was civil on Twitter right around Easter, whether or not Catholics should be encouraged to go to the chapels of Society of St Pius X, which is technically you can technically you can, but the letter from the Vatican says, Ecclesia Dei says, but it's very, very risky for most people. I'm paraphrasing. It's very risky of being dragged away into what do they call it? Formal adherence to a schismatic spirit. That's a term from the letter. Formal adherence to a schismatic spirit. And of course, so a lot of the people, it's just a very complex issue because it's good guys that are doing the right thing through some of the wrong ways. And there is a lot of ambiguity. Nevertheless, here's how I break it all down. I mean, when people were watching TNT back in the day, 2018, early 2019, and they would see me, Timothy Gordon and Taylor Marshall, left, right halves of the screen or whatever. It's funny because, I mean, temperament, to go back to your marriage analogy, it accounts for a lot, right? You look at these two dudes, Californian Tim or whatever. I've never referred to myself in the third person before, but kind of like, played in rock and roll. They know I was a skateboarder, played basketball. You'd kind of think this is your natural born rebel, temperamentally speaking, that struggles probably with obedience more, just naturally, if I had to guess. And then you have Taylor Marshall. He's an Eagle Scout. He's a little more buttoned up than me, the high and tight haircut, it all looks good. It's a good aesthetic in the opposite way. It looks like this is your natural born rule follower. So I think, to say nothing of any more of the controversial elements of this, what I would say that I think it's a good comment that I've never made publicly is, in the 90s and the early 2000s, bear that temperamental disparity between, you'd kind of look like more obedient Taylor Marshall, more disobedient Timothy Gordon, if you had to guess by temperament. With all that background in the mind, in the 90s, early 2000s, Catholicism went through a thing where most of its thought leaders, and I'd say even most now, tended, at least lay thought leaders, tended to be converts, right? I mean, you look at even yourself, right? Converts from Protestantism. Because the 70s, 80s, 90s were so bad for cradle Catholics like me, a lot of them just got chased out of the faith. But here's what I'm saying. TNT, forget all the controversial stuff. It represented a really nice dynamism because you had a lay Catholic and a convert, cradle Catholic, sorry, and a convert to Catholicism that were a really good team. There needs to be the converts because they have their own like charism, which is, it's kind of making the point I'm trying to, fiery individualism and all that. And then the cradle Catholics naturally, I think, understand probably better, not virtue of being good or better, just by virtue of being cradle Catholics. Like, yeah, really complex stuff can happen in the church. You can have a really bad time in the church, worst time ever now, Vatican II, before it, and now after it. This is the worst time ever. But the church is it's still not a false church, even if many of the bishops are in kind of low-level apostasy. We still have to be obedient. And my whole point in saying all this is that you look at us too, irrespective of this other one factor, and you'd think Tim's the disobedient guy, Taylor's the guy that's easy, got obedience locked down. And then on the SSPX issue where we are kind of debating, I'm not saying anyone's formally disobedient, but I'd say we kind of switch places, me and Taylor, due to our status as either a cradle Catholic or a convert. It's an interesting thing, and it shows that we have room for both charisms, the cradle charism and the convert charism. I think it's just an interesting intellectual point I learned around Easter.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I actually brought up the cradle Catholic and the convert Catholic dynamic in maybe my last video or the video before. And as far as temperament, you're right. It's so true how people will judge people's policies or their theology by their temperament. Even in politics, I have so many people that think Trump, for example, is a warmonger because of his tone and his attitude and personality, yet he's the most dovish president we've ever had, ever. And, and the industrial military complex hate Trump. And he's trying tooth and nail to get us out of these wars that everybody, Republicans and Democrats, are standing up against him. And people just assume this guy's a warmonger, but if you watch what he's actually doing, like I said, he's the most dovish president we've ever had in my lifetime. So I get that with the temperament, but I did promise a couple of my viewers I would ask you some questions. So I don't want to forget them. I got a lot on the screen. I'm not going to be get to.
I'll go fast. I'll give you fast answers. You can get. That wasn't you asked me 2 important ones, so I took more time. But go ahead.
Why Mississippi?
Mississippi. So I love the forest. Look, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings nerd, and Mississippi, driving through all the beautiful southern forests in the country. I live in the desert, man. Go look at a topo of the United States. Pretty much everything west of the Continental Divide's desert with little green patches. I want the forest. I wanted the best, biggest trees. Alabama's got really beautiful ones, but Mississippi has beautiful ones. So we've kind of looked at it for a while now. Also, it's cheapest land in the country doesn't hurt, given my unemployed situation. So it's a combination of beauty and cheapness. Yeah. I
lived in Mississippi for 3 months, and it took me the full 3 months come from Jersey. I was going to Navy A school in Meridian, Mississippi for 3 months. And literally there was a communication problem. They didn't understand me with my heavy Jersey accent, which I since lost. And I didn't understand then. But by the time I left, we got along pretty well. And yeah, it's a beautiful state. Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to try and speed this up because I think we got about 10 minutes. So I'll
go rapid fire, man.
All right. So my Patreon, let me find them here. Kevin Sweeney. Okay, so he asked me a question. Hey, man, I have a question. I left a movement called the ICOC. I'm thinking that's International Church of Christ. I'm not sure. Before joining the Catholic Church, they believed in baptismal regeneration, but not infant baptism. I have tried to bring up Colossians 2:11 about how baptism is the new circumcision, but an argument they use is in Colossians 2:12 about how we are buried in baptism and raised through faith. They say here shows that faith is required to be raised up. Thus, you can't baptize a baby because they don't have faith yet. How would you answer that argument?
Man, I mean, so what Protestants are always doing is, pistis faith, like in the original language there, or like fide. That's the Latin. Go pistis versus episteme. I mean, like faith isn't. It's not a kind of knowledge. The way Protestants talk about faith is that there's like fides and ratio. Like there's 2 types of knowing. You know something in your head, or you know it in your heart or your gut. That's not what it is. I mean, there's only one type of knowing. It's knowing it with your ratio. You adequate the ratio to your intellectus. So anytime you talk about faith like that, you're talking about the sort of faith that a grown-up person would need, right? You couldn't confer the faith on a baby. And there are lots of different answers. This is a great Catholic answers question. But what I would say is the faith is a series of acts and even rites, rites, in conformity with reason that can be begun before the age of reason. And so it's there really, to be honest, I'm not trying to like throw stones, but it's their really babyish, I don't know how else to say it, puerile understanding of faith, in the sense that like the pop culture talks about it, a way of knowing in your gut or your heart. It's not a way of knowing. Faith is a series of acts and rites that are in concomitance, in conformity with the intellect. It's not another way of knowing. And their model of, whatever they call it, their rejection of paedobaptism breaks down unless faith is another kind of knowing. It's just nonsense. Faith is a doing in conformity with the knowing, and it involves rights that can begin before the age of reason. So they're just wrong. It's just very wrong. Ask Trent Horn or someone at Catholic Answers or Pat Coffin. They'd give an even better answer. I'm trying to give an answer that they won't get if they look it up on the Catholic Answers board or something like that.
I appreciate it. Well, I'm really thankful for all your information. You're like I said, told my listeners a couple videos ago. I left the faith and I came back, and although when I came back, I felt like the prodigal son, and the father threw a party for me, but I could never regain my inheritance that I gave up, and that inheritance is 30 years of Catholic teaching that I'm trying to catch up. So to me, it's a privilege and an honor to have someone like you that stayed faithful your whole life. Even though you've seen so many things wrong in the church, you stayed faithful and you learned, and you can teach men like me and my viewers. And I want to say thanks again. I'm really blessed that you were here, and we're going to be praying for your family. And I would like you to tell us once again how we could donate and help you and your family in this terrible situation you find yourself in. And before I go, I just want to recommend these books again: Rules for Retrogrades, and also Catholic Republic.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, it's timothyjgordon.com. There's a donate button. There's also an enroll button. I'm offering 3 really awesome courses this fall, and people are enrolling at a staggering rate. One quick thing, because I don't want to take false credit, man. I guess intellectually, I always knew that if faith were real, it had to be Aristotelism. I always kind of intellectually stuck with studying Aristotle, and then came back to studying Thomas through him. But I in college, and even in the first part of grad school in my young 20s, I was not the greatest Catholic. I did have weeks I wouldn't go to church. I was a kind of lapsed Catholic. I just never left the moral teachings of Aristotle and Thomas too robustly. And if anything, I mean, at least you had the courage of your convictions and kind of just, oh, I'm going to go be evangelical now. So don't be too hard on yourself. I was kind of like, I was raised in the Boomer Susan parishes, right? And so I didn't really take the liturgy seriously. So I wouldn't go a lot of times. I wouldn't go to confession much per year. And I realized that it was all real. Even though I kind of knew intellectually it was all real, I always defended Aristotle and Thomas, but I wasn't living it for 5, 6, 7 years there. I mean, in some ways, my reversion was kind of a conversion, the way anyone speaks that way, because I got it fully for the first time. So don't beat yourself up, and don't put me on a pedestal, because I had a similar. It was hard to grow up in the 80s and 90s church and take it seriously.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. I was an evangelical pointing out all your church's flaws in the 80s and 90s.
There are plenty if you judge by the church man. Yeah.
But again, so if there's anything else you want to say before we say goodbye, feel free. If not, I just want to say thanks again. God bless, and Lord willing, we can do this another time. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thanks a million. I've enjoyed it too. Everyone, pray for, not only the reconciliation with the church, pray for the world, and pray that we can convert souls in this time, and pray that we can reconcile one brother with another. People, not just TNT, that we'll get more shows, but just that pray for understanding with those who don't have a hardened heart, who are just legitimately misunderstanding one another. Look, BLM, the people that know the ideas behind these thought movements, terror, there's real evil. They want to cut our throats or whatever. That's one thing. But if it's legit misunderstandings, pray for that the rifts of the world are healed. It's possible.
Amen. That's a good final word. Thank you. Awesome.
Peace.
Peace.